Muhammad cut off the hands and feet from the men from the tribe of Urania and left them to bleed to death. When I looked this up on an Islamic website, the current justification of this heinous act is mind-boggling. Their view of this story is, some people from Urania tribe came to Medina and its climate did not suit them, so Allah's apostle, Pubba. The Muslims always follow Muhammad's name or a reference to him with the words, peace be upon him, which this author used so many times that he started abbreviating it by putting PBUH. I find it amusing to read it as written by the author, Pubba. Muhammad, Pubba, allowed them to go to the herd of camels, given as zakat, and they drank their milk and urine as medicine. But they killed the shepherd and drove away all the camels. So Allah's apostle sent men. Interesting. No Pubba here. Wonder if the author needs to be punished for this. In their pursuit to catch them, they were brought, and he had their hands and feet cut, and their eyes were branded with heated pieces of iron, and they were left in the Hara, the stony place at Medina, biting the stones. This narration is often quoted in order to present the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as someone who delivered exceedingly cruel and barbaric punishments. This narration refers to an event of haraba, armed robbery. Now, I skipped over his support and jumped to his conclusion, leaving out the part where he explains that the men of Urania were ill, and thus Muhammad offered them camel milk and urine. But the conclusion that this was armed robbery is nowhere supported in the several works that he cites. Where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, implemented the law of qisas, retribution, and the offenders were punished exactly as they had punished the shepherd. Another interesting addition to the conclusion, not supported in the work, that the men were punishing the shepherd. If the men were punishing the shepherd for a wrong committed, why do the men then need to be punished for administering justice? It seems like a never-ending cycle of punishment. The Prophet did not exceed this limit at all in his prescribed punishment, but rather purified the offenders so that their punishment in the next life would be averted. Okay, so I guess cruelty and barbarity are okay as long as your intent is to purify someone for the afterlife. The ends justifies the means.
Europe is confronting a violent, discriminatory extremist cult, radical Islamists, and not enough people there seem to notice. The views are alarming. 52% of British Muslims think homosexuality should be illegal. 47% of British Muslims think a gay person should not be a school teacher. 35% of British Muslims think Jews have too much power in Britain.
Groups of Muslims have recently begun to attempt to impose Sharia zones in Europe. For example, legal action is pending by a group of Copenhagen bar owners against these so-called Sharia patrols that have reportedly vandalized their bars and threatened patrons, saying those areas belong to them and no drinking is allowed. These gangs have also allegedly asked the bar owners for payments of up to $10,000 as protection money. Similar patrols have also been reported in London, Wuppertal, Germany. In London, those patrols inspired Christian patrols to counter them, creating a powder keg of religious tension. In New York, a Muslim community patrol was established, which takes a more hearts and minds approach, doling out food and providing services. However, the disruption in Denmark became so unbearable that draconian anti-Islamic laws were passed and policies instituted to mitigate the perceived threat to their culture and values, both by the nation's right-wing Liberal Party and their left-wing Social Democratic Party. From immigration changes, regulations regarding hijabs, even going so far as to mandate Muslim children spend time away from their parents, a lose-lose situation for all involved. The most depressing thing about all of this is that after all these centuries, yet another generation must grow up with hatred, distrust, and fear. Another generation robbed of the cooperation of their peers. Another generation forced by the previous one to suffer and squabble and fight and fail to achieve all that they could have achieved had they not been preoccupied with the vestigial burdens heaped upon them by their gullible, superstitious, short-sighted ancestors.
Do what your boss says, even if your boss is black, like the head of a raisin. Oh, even if he has a black head of a raisin. Eating dates for breakfast will protect you from magic and poison. Muhammad said, if you play chess, you may as well dip your hands in pig's blood. Your
There
right
are also
shoe.
imams. There are also imams who say that if you masturbate, you'll make your hands pregnant.
I'm going to have to look that one up. Oh, boy. Your right shoe should be the first one you put on and the last one you take off. When you eat, be sure to lick your fingers or have someone else lick them before you wipe them with your hands. Muhammad said, when you pray, if you raise your head before the imam does, Allah will turn your face and head into that of a donkey. Now, the Hadith. Now, you've been reading the Quran for a while. I don't know if you're done with it on your series,
Not
but
yet.
you have to recognize the Hadith as something that now there are at least 6, maybe 7 Hadiths that the Sunnis and the Shias both agree on, and then there's much more that they have not in common.
Yeah, the funny thing is that nobody knows how many hadiths there are.
Right.
They're all supposed to be corrections of the infallible. They're clarifications of the perfectly clear Quran, and there are tens of thousands estimated, maybe over 100,000. No one knows. So how can this be a clarification or correction of the Quran? So this is when some literally untold numbers, innumerable people say that when the Quran says this is what God meant to say. His infallible eminence misspoke. It's much like when the Pope said that atheists can get into heaven, and then the bishops had to make a public statement the next day to say that his infallible eminence misspoke.
Was it Abu Bakr? It might have been whoever was compiling the hadiths originally. It was like 300 years after Muhammad's death, but he was compiling them from oral testimony, written on leather scraps, written on animal shoulder bones, and he took 300,000 and he compiled them into 20,000 that he believed were the true hadith. It just seemed, it's so rectally derived. It just seems so human. It seems so not divinely inspired.
Yeah, very definitely.
Oh, hey guys. Wait, what? What is that? Oh no! Do not look at that picture. No, don't look at that. It's a picture of Muhammad. Oh, my bad. I guess it only counts if you draw it. Anyway, Muslims proclaim that the Quran was given to Muhammad by Allah via the angel Gabriel. You see that pic behind me right there? You see that? So the Quran should be written from Allah's point of view. Right off the bat, we see much of it is written by someone else. The very first surah in the book says, "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the universe, the most gracious, the most merciful, owner of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, and you alone we turn to for help to guide us to the straight path, the path of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, not the way of those who have earned your anger, nor of those who went astray." The entire book is littered with passages that could not have been written by Allah. Unless, of course, speaking in the third person was on trend for the 7th century. Still seems a little fishy.
Number of places in the Quran that teaches Muslims to love people of other religions. 0. Absolutely 0. Number of places in the Quran that teaches Muslims to hate, fight, or kill people of other religions. Over 36. Number of places in the Hadith that teaches Muslims to hate, fight, or kill people of other religions? Hundreds. Obviously, Islam is a religion of peace, provided, of course, that you follow Islam. Yeah, we won't even get into the fights between different groups of followers within Islam.
If you live in Ireland or the UK and you plan to grab a nice bacon or ham sub at Subway, you might be out of luck. About 200 of the sandwich restaurants have already caved into demands to serve only halal meat, which means no pork products. Incidentally, the halal method of slaughter, slitting the throat while the animal is fully conscious, has been ruled inhumane and needlessly cruel by many animal rights organizations.
The Kaaba, I think it's Kaaba. The Kaaba is a small granite building in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, that Muslims pray toward 5 times a day. Here are so when they're pointing to the east or wherever they're pointing at this building, no matter where in the world they are. Here are some interesting things you probably didn't know about the Kaaba. Muslims perform the tawaf, a ritual involving walking around the building. How many times, Owen?
I'm sure it's 7.
Yep, it's 7. Yeah, walking around the building 7 times. Before measures were taken to prevent flooding, worshipers sometimes had to literally swim around the building. Second one, the Kaaba on earth is supposedly an exact replica of the Kaaba in heaven, where Allah resides and angels perform tawaf themselves and prayers. The Kaaba means cube, but the building was originally rectangular, having been destroyed, rebuilt, and renovated many times. And finally, there's a black stone set in the corner of the Kaaba. It's a different color, different texture than the rest of the building. It's said to have been dropped from heaven. Scientists that, of course, they can't get a sample, so this is the best estimate. Scientists say that it's either a piece of basalt, agate, or natural glass, or a meteorite is the leading idea that what this is. So it might have, dropped from heaven, so to speak. On the day of resurrection, it is believed that the stone will grow 2 eyes and a tongue and will speak favorably of everyone who has ever touched it in reverence. So when they're walking around, you'll see them touching that stone, some kissing it, whatever. So yeah, they think it's going to grow a face and then start speaking favorably of everyone that's ever touched it.
So I visited Graceland once, and I see the same thing with Elvis fans, right? They want to touch his refrigerator and touch his couch, and like the guests, the hosts at Graceland have to get people to stop touching stuff. So I don't know which is more powerful, Allah or Elvis, but yeah.
Wow, that's almost blasphemy.
This is all
Elvis. Obviously Elvis.
Again, with the caveat that I'm no Islam expert, this is all just further evidence of what ancient people thought of as this grand, important thing, and we think, it's just some scrubby little building in the Middle East, and it's a man-made religion, and so of course they're going to make up silly man-made customs that don't sound anything like what the creator of the whole universe would put value in.
Yeah, you see the theme throughout ancient history. Ancient people had the need to try and appease angry deities, and so they would go out of their way to sort of supplicate, and so that there seems to be this intense human need to worship and to try to seek favor from some sky father, it's this extended mythicism that develops into a theology. And that's, to Rex's point, this is a common theme across many ancient religions. And I'm not surprised that Muhammad lived in the 6th or 7th century on our calendar. It doesn't strike me as at all odd that the kinds of myths and tales that would be invented during that time would sound like this. It's exactly what I would expect from a human mind in that era.
Well, and something Dr. Hall just said too about how it had gotten torn down and rebuilt and such. This sounds just like the story of the Hebrew temple in Jerusalem, right? Like it starts out as this tent that they're carrying on poles, and then they settle down, and Solomon's going to build this grand version of it, and then it gets torn down, and Herod's going to build a version of it, and then it gets torn down, and now they're just like praying at this one little torn down wall that's barely there anymore. And yet if you're standing in that place, you can look up and see the sky and the clouds and the sun and the moon, and look to your right and you see the mountains, and to your left is the beautiful sea, and you've got all this wonder of the natural world, but your stories tell you to focus on this stupid half torn down wall. Like, that's the important thing, instead of saying, hey, look around, we've got a pretty amazing world without this mythology. But yeah, I mean, that's what people do. And Owen, when you said everybody always wants to find, the idea that there's somebody they can talk to, somebody they can pray to, it's because the alternative was so scary, right? The alternative, or at least they thought it would be scary, is that we have no control, that we are ants on a tiny anthill in a vast galaxy, in a vast universe, and there's no one in charge, there's no one watching over us. But sometimes the thing you need to do is grow up, right? Like, I don't fault the ancients for clinging to those stories. I fault us for not growing up and saying, let's put those stories in a museum and a library where they belong and understand our ancestors, but let's live in the real world. And the real world is still pretty amazing, even if there's no sky god in charge, even if there's nothing we can do to control the weather with our prayers or any other part of our life.
Completely. I would argue that from a purely naturalistic perspective, the world we live in, the universe, is so much more beautiful and amazing. And when we accept the finite nature of our lives and our relationships, everything around us becomes more precious. And I think Christians have gotten it wrong for years. I don't think there's any value in imagining that you're going to get a do-over on relationships that you've lost with family members who've passed away at some future time in the sky. I think that the mandate for human beings is to love as deeply as they can and treasure those relationships for as long as they can while they have access to them, precisely because you don't get a do-over.